GMO. What are they? Are they good or bad? GM foods have been altered using genetic engineering techniques in a laboratory. GM foods are a subject of a huge controversy among those who exhibit strong feelings on both sides. GM foods are sold in stores worldwide. In fact, the vast majority of crops grown in North America are genetically modified. So, are GM foods healthy? And if not, what can they do to harm those who consume them? Foods that are packaged or contain ingredients that are derived from corn, soy, canola, or sugar beet are most likely genetically modified.
GMOs stand for genetically modified organisms. When GMOs are used on plants, they create superweeds,
which can cause harmful effects on the crops. Oh, no, oh, jeez.
On tonight's news, we will be covering GMOs and the pros and cons. For the pros, we have Justin, and supporting the cons of GMOs, we have Celeste.
GMOs are harmless. Did you know foods treated with GMOs last longer and taste better?
That may be true, but GMO foods are easier to contaminate due to all of the cross-pollination.
They also have a higher herbicide and disease resistance.
But GMOs can cause unintended harm to other organisms, such as bumblebees.
But GMO plants have a stronger pest resistance than regular crops.
GMOs also raise many economic concerns and have unknown effects on human health.
GMOs also have a higher cold, drought, and salinity tolerance.
But think about the downsides of reduced pesticide effectiveness. Scientists agree that current technology is unable to detect minute quantities of contamination, so ensuring 0% contamination using existing methodologies is not guaranteed. Because the FDA does not have the resources to carry out testing to ensure compliance, there are many challenges ahead for the governments in the areas of safety testing, regulation, international policy, and food labeling.
I think that just about settles it. Sounds like there's a lot of cons, so we will see you again tomorrow at 5 o'clock. How are GM foods regulated, and what is the government's role in the process? Governments around the world are hard at work to establish a regulatory process to monitor the effects of and approve new varieties of GM plants. Yet, depending on the political, social, and economic climate within a region or country, different governments are responding different ways. Although India's government has not yet announced a policy on GM foods, it is very supportive of transgenic plant research. It is highly likely that India will decide that the benefits of GM foods outweigh the risks because Indian agriculture will need to adopt drastic new measures to counteract the country's endemic poverty and to feed its exploding population. Some states in Brazil have banned GM foods entirely. Brazilian farmers, however, have resorted to smuggling GM soybeans into the country because they fear economic harm if they are unable to compete in the global marketplace with other grain exporting countries. In Europe, anti-GM food protesters have been especially active due to two major food scares in Great Britain and Belgium. Citizens are disinclined to trust government information about GM foods. In response to the public outcry, Europe now requires mandatory food labeling of GM foods in stores. And the European Commission has established a 1% threshold for contamination of unmodified foods with GM food products. There are, however, many questions that still must be answered if labeling of GM foods becomes mandatory in the US. First, are consumers willing to absorb the cost of such an initiative? Secondly, what are the acceptable limits of GM contamination in non-GM products? Third, what is the level of detectability of GM food cross-contamination? And finally, who is to be responsible for educating the public about GM food labels, and how costly will that education be? In conclusion, genetically modified foods have the potential to solve many of the world's hunger and malnutrition problems. And although the benefits of GM foods are easy to see, we must carefully weigh the risks of such endeavors.
It is not quite settled on whether GMO foods are unhealthy or not. However, there are major risks associated with them, including but not limited to accelerated aging, immune problems, and changes to major organs. The genetic engineering process creates mutations in hundreds or even thousands of locations throughout the plant's DNA. which may cause proteins that can trigger allergies or even promote disease. GMOs are also known to make liver problems. According to a 2015 study, rats fed GM potatoes had smaller and partially damaged livers. GM soy altered mouse liver cells in ways that suggest a toxic insult. The changes reversed after they switched to non-GM soy. All in all, it is better to avoid GM foods in all.
Labeling. Should we label our GMO food products? Over the last 10 years, over 40 countries have adopted labeling regulations. In India, labeling GM products is required by law. These regulations have not affected consumer choice. Consumers should be informed of the traits and properties of the food they consume in order to make informed choices. Look at this orange juice. At first glance, it appears to be a normal bottle of orange juice. As we consume these products, we are unaware of the GM process these ingredients have been through. Wouldn't you like to be informed about what exactly your food is and what the ingredients entail? Voluntary food labeling dictate rules that allow companies to decide whether they want to use such information labeling. Mandatory labeling requires to display whether the product is derived from GMOs. Using voluntary food labeling can allow companies to mask the use of GMOs. We hope these facts deter you from consuming GMO products from now on.